Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
My name is Chet, C-H-E-T, K-O-B-E-L, Kobel. I live down in Byron, Illinois, and I was born in Elgin, Illinois. 1927 was a relatively good time in the history of the United States, but of course in 1929 came the Great Depression. My father was laid off in the watch factory when things got really difficult, and he then went to work in the Chicago gravel pit doing manual labor, labor that was so foreign to him. He'd always been a watchmaker, you know, and that didn't require a lot of muscles. But to his wonderful and great credit, he went out there and worked in that gravel pit for a number of years to keep the family together, and he did successfully do that.
To provide security for those of our citizens and their families who, through no fault of their own, face unemployment and privation during the coming winter.
Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger.
Well, I'd like to dwell a little bit on what it was like in 1941 in high school with a war on. You know, World War II was unlike any other war we've ever experienced. It's the only time that we were on the defensive. You know, we've been in a lot of wars. We've been in Korea, we've been in Vietnam, we've been in everywhere, but we're always over there fighting someone else's fight in someone else's area. But World War II, we had been attacked.
Has passed, and we do honor to our beloved dead who fell before the sneak Jap. We remember, each of us gathered here today, safely sheltered. We remember the graves far away, nurses, soldiers, children of Pearl Harbor, stabbed in the back. But remembering is not enough.
I was a freshman in high school, 1941, when it happened.
We have witnessed this morning a distant view, a great battle off Pearl Harbor, and a severe bombing of Pearl Harbor by enemy planes, undoubtedly Japanese.
Hearing about things in 1941 was a lot different than it is today. We had radio and we had newspaper, you know.
The real war.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
So I mean, everybody was appalled. They were upset. It was terrible. Now I'm a senior in high school, and this patriotic feeling is there for everyone wanted to be in the service. The boys wanted to be in the service, the girls wanted to be in service, and then when they could. So at the turn of the semester in January of 1945, the school came out with a program that said, if your grades were above a certain level, and if your parents would sign for you, you could go into the service at 17. And that's exactly what happened to me. My grades were up there. My father agreed to sign for me, so on April the 1st of 1945, I went into the Navy.
Cadets of the United States Military Academy assemble for their first graduation of World War II. Solemn and impressive is the ceremony as the youngsters receive their commissions.
There was a lot of physical activity, a lot of marching, a lot of calisthenics, a lot of that sort of stuff. A lot of swimming because we were Navy recruits. That in itself was quite a story. They had a huge swimming pool there, and you went over the side into the pool whether you could swim or not. You know, when you're 17, you can do anything. You know that. You know, you can. When you're doing something and you're doing it with 10, 12, 50, or 500 other people in exactly the same boat, it's not a problem. I left the U.S. Excuse me, about June 1st and went to the South Pacific. I was on a troop transport, a transport, if you will, for soldiers and Marines to be taken to the Philippines, to Okinawa, to Saipan, to all of those places.
Chet mentions his ship reaching the Philippines, Okinawa, and Saipan, where they helped evacuate soldiers. These soldiers were evacuated due to injuries they sustained from combat and men who were relieved from the front of the war. In these three battles, more than 80,000 American lives were lost.
Whenever we went into a place, the only reason we went in there was to either pick up personnel or discharge personnel. Rarely did we, as the ship personnel, ever get ashore. Well, very soon after I got on the ship, I became what they called in those days the fuel and water king. While I was a machinist mate, my responsibility was to keep the ship level. And on a big ship like that, you've got to understand it's burning a tremendous amount of oil, and we're using a tremendous amount of fresh water. And dependent upon where it was used, it's very possible for the ship to tip, you know. So my responsibility was for 24 hours a day to go around the ship and manipulate a various amount of valves to transfer fluids from one area to another area and keep the ship level. So while everyone else had to muster in the morning, I didn't have to do that because I was probably up during the night. So typically during a day, I would roam around the ship, but I would go to the mess hall for breakfast and lunch and dinner. And again, because I had this additional responsibility, I had the keys for everything. So I had a way to get into the reefers and all this sort of thing. So it was not unusual in a typical night for me to sneak into the reefers and get something good to eat and take it down to the engine room and have a little lunch with the men. But I was on two different ships, and I got that designation on both of them. And I don't honestly remember why I got it. Maybe I had some sort of an aptitude that they recognized. So
A violent typhoon whips at Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet as winds ranging up to 138 miles an hour pound the force as it withdraws from an attack on the Jap homeland. For the second time in less than 6 months, our fleet has been caught in a typhoon common in the China Seas.
Well, we were in the storm in August of 1945 at Okinawa. That was a hurricane, and we turned, and because we were warned, we turned and ran from it, but we didn't get away from it. And I have some pictures at home showing damage to our ship. I have another picture at home that I took off the bridge, showing nothing forward of the bridge but water. You know, where this huge ship, this ship was 800 foot long. It was a former President liner converted to military use, and when you imagine, this is the bridge clear up here, and when you can imagine all of that underwater, so we received quite a bit of damage from that, and I can still vividly remember going back into Okinawa after the storm passed. And have you heard what an LST is? Does that ring a bell at all? Well, there's a picture of one here, but if you can see it right here, that's that ship that had the big ramp on the front of it that used to run on the shore, and then they dropped the ramp down and everybody would run off it. Well, on our ship, because we had all this personnel, we had what they call LSVPs, landing ship, vehicle, and personnel. In that Red Harbor on Okinawa, there were hundreds of these ships sunk in that harbor, and all you could see is that big steel grated front end of it sticking up out of the water. That, of course, that same hurricane devastated Okinawa, the people that were on the ground. Everyone was apprehensive, you know, everybody wanted to do it because this was a culmination of that war. You know, we were prepared for it. We also recognized there were going to be a lot of people die, but in our case, it was going to be the people who we had on board the APA who would we transfer to the mainland. You know, in an operation such as that, the Bell and ships like it would lay off the shore as much as 2 or 3 miles, and then these little ships would take the troops back and forth. They were under constant fire wherever they went, you know. Everybody was ready, I guess, to the extent. You know, there was a tremendous amount of hatred there because there, you know, whether it was true or not, there was always the stories of the atrocities and the Bataan Death March and all of that sort of stuff. That was all part of our life, you know. We were in the South Pacific preparing for the invasion of Japan when President Truman authorized the dropping of the atomic bomb. And all of a sudden, you know, in a 2-day period there, the war was over.
Japan surrenders. Japan surrenders. Now repeating the entire bulletin, the Japanese government has accepted the Allied surrender formula embodied in the note dispatched to Tokyo by the United States. The Tokyo...
That was a feeling that was almost impossible to describe. You know, there's been a lot of controversy over the years about what happened then, but in my eyes, it was the most merciful thing that could have ever happened. Yes, there were 400,000 Japanese killed when that bomb was dropped, but there would have been 500,000 Americans killed if we had invaded Japan, and there'd have been 1 million Japanese killed in that invasion, you know, and we were preparing for it. It was, you know, in August of 1945, we were loading up and getting ready and taking on, everyone was, for the invasion. Probably that was the most memorable occasion of my life when that happened. And I went over there twice, and on one trip, we took a train down to the bomb site, and and arrived there late in the day, early into the evening, and the only thing that was visible at that time was that picture, if you'll remember, of the City Hall with a skeleton roof on it that was left there, and everything else was just devastated. And they had a memorial there, much like the Arizona, but on ground. And she and I toured that, the only Americans in the place at that time. And I can get goose pimples just thinking about that now, because they had pictures in there, of a stone wall with the shadow of a person that was burned on the wall from the atomic bomb and that sort of thing. So they honored that day over there in the same way that we honored the Arizona. So that was extremely memorable, so. Oh God, if there's any way to stay out of it, do it. No one wins. Yes, we won the war in Europe, we won the war in Japan, but at what cost?
What we do in this class is extremely important to us, being able to create a story off of a veteran's story, and it's also important to the families of the veterans, being able to relive what their family member had went through. When we started this class, we were given a list of veterans to choose from, and I chose out Chet, who was a World War II veteran who served in the Pacific Theater. After I'd finished watching Chet's raw interview, all I could think about was creating the documentary. Throughout struggles in my own life, all I could still think about was making this documentary for Chet. I'm a type 1 diabetic, and my blood sugar got too low, and I had a seizure. During that seizure, I tore both of the labrums in my right and left shoulder, and I had to have surgery on both of them. I was limited to sleeping on a couch for 6 months total, and still all I could think about was creating this documentary. Making it meant a lot to me, and even though I never really got to meet Chet before it was done, all I could think about was his reaction towards it and wondering how he would feel when it was done. Making it meant a lot to me because this really is a tribute of Chet's life, and what we do in this class is make a tribute to every veteran. So I can't really say this in person, Chet, but thank you for all that you did. Thank you to all the veterans, and I hope you enjoyed this documentary. Done.